quick overview of the 513, including the VoIP. The 404, the VoIP section of the 404 is identical to the voice section of the 513. So anything that we cover for the 513 on the voice side will also apply to the 404.
Okay.
Let me just a little bit of background. I heard that you're a technical person. What was your name? It wasn't Haro. It was, what was your name, please?
Mr. Ranjan.
Yeah, Ranjan.
Ramjan, right? Ramjan. Right. Okay, great. And so your background, are you a certified Cisco engineer?
Yes, right.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, this is going to be very, very easy for you. So just a little bit of background. These routers are based on FreeBSD, so they're Unix routers. And what we have is we have a web GUI wrapped around all the services running under FreeBSD. So you have a full Unix machine that's running in the background. All of the services are available via a web GUI. So there's nothing that you need to do from a CLI. However, there is a CLI available, and the units can be customized infinitely to meet a specific application. So what I want to do is basically just run through some of the GUI features and just to make you aware of some of the differences between our products and Cisco. This product will do pretty much anything a Cisco router will do, but the theory of operation, specifically when it comes to the firewall filtering rules, is a little bit different than what you're accustomed to. So the 513 is the top of a line router. It's a router and a voice unit all combined into one. If you look at the unit itself, you'll notice that it has 3 Ethernet ports and then 4 RJ11 jacks for analog telephones.
Right.
The unit itself supports VLANs, so you can expand those Ethernet ports to as many as you want. For example, you can put a smart Cisco business switch on there and then add multiple WANs to the unit, and then you can support any number of satellite devices with a particular unit. And of course you can add switches to add more LAN ports as well. So the unit is very, very extensible. You could have, I think our record is 11 satellite units connected to one of these routers. And then you can configure it for doing automatic failover or manual failover, load balancing, and different kind of routing through the different ports as you fit as you desire. On the voice side, there's 4 analog ports, which means that you can have a total on this unit of 8 regular telephone lines connected to it. However, it has a full-blown PBX running, and the PBX that's running is FreeSwitch, which is a large open source PBX, which has got many hundreds of thousands of installations worldwide and runs major corporations. And so you can support any number of extensions, of SIP extensions, on a specific vessel or an installation. And so you'll be able to have, for example, installations where you could run an entire ship or an entire oil platform or whatever, where you have an extension in every room, for example, or where your passengers are using smartphones to actually interact with the PBX with a specific extension. The extensions can be configured as postpaid or prepaid, as we'll see when we get to that. And so you could have 60 postpaid accounts or extensions, and you could have 60 prepaid extensions, for example. The difference being there.
I will interrupt.
Pardon me?
This 513 has 4 ports, 4 RJ11 ports.
It has four analog ports, but it supports unlimited number of SIP ports.
Unlimited number of SIP ports.
Yes, so you could have 4 analog phones just connected directly to it, but you could have 200 telephones connected to it if they were SIP phones.
Okay, say like any SIP phone, SIP activated phones, I can directly connect it to the network
That is correct.
along with the 513.
That is correct, and you could have 200 of them or more. We're going to do a vessel that, yeah, that has 300 cabins, for example.
Okay.
Now so you can have any number of SIP phones. If you want more analog lines, what you can do is you can buy a PAP-T, which is a Cisco ATA, which is a
Right.
small device that has 2 analog ports that actually converts them into a SIP
Okay.
Correct.
thing, and then you can add more analog telephones anywhere you want by just using these PAP-T. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
clear.
Amazon.com, Cisco PAP. So these devices, for example, which are quite inexpensive, have analog ports, and you can just hook them onto your LAN, and they're just SIP extensions on the PBX, and you could have those spread all over the vessel if you didn't want to use SIP phones. However, SIP phones are quite inexpensive, like these Grand Streams, for example. Oh, that's that's a Cisco SIP phone, but Grand Stream, for example, has some inexpensive Grand Stream IP phones. So, for example, here's a perfectly good phone that we've used in a lot of our installations, which is $50, which is a very good, very nice, inexpensive SIP phone. So any SIP phone that you want to use will work on the installation, and you can have any number of those. Our preference is actually for you to use a SIP phones than to use analog phones. It's easier to hook them up because normally you have Ethernets, and it's all digital, so the voice quality is a little better, and so we like the SIP phones better than we like the analog phones. But anyway, so that's kind of a detraction there. So we have a full-blown PBX, and we'll go over some of those PBX features. But you'll be able to have any kind of dialing rules or dial plans, extensions, and so forth that you need on that particular unit. So let me just go over the interface quickly.
Okay.
On this particular installation, I think you're going to be doing only voice, so I'm just going to do a quick overview of the user interface, just to kind of get you familiar with how it works, and talk a little bit about how to set up the firewall rules and some of the compression that you'll want to test. But before I do that, let me take you to some resources. If you go to redportglobal.com,
Okay.
and you go to the support tab, you will find the manuals for the units online. And so there's a very extensive router guide for doing all the routing setup. It's about 80 pages long. I recommend highly that you spend some time with that. It will explain every feature on the router side of the unit. And then there's a administrator's VoIP guide, which is a fairly extensive document, which focuses on the VoIP side of the operation. Nothing is very complicated, but it's all documented there, and I recommend that you download that as well and spend some time. Those are your reference guides to the units.
Okay.
Okay.
So so you hook up the 513 to your system. It has 3 ports. The port closest to the edge, which is labeled as ETH1, or I'm sorry, ETH0, is the LAN port by default.
Yes.
And the center port is ETH1, is the LAN port. And then the other port, which is the one that's next to the serial console, is the WAN 2 port, or the auxiliary second satellite port. So in most of our installations, or a lot of our installations, we have a primary satellite unit, and then we have a secondary satellite unit. That might be a VSAT, for example, for the primary, with a fleet broadband for the secondary. And so we direct all of our traffic through the primary and then use a secondary as a failover. In some installations, for example, we've got dual fleet broadband 500 VLAN, VLA installations, where we run the two fleet broadbands at the same time to get 800 kbps on the vessel.
Okay.
Then both of those ports are just configured as load balancing ports, and half of the traffic goes through one port and half of the traffic goes through the other port. All right, so once you've got your, go ahead.
Just a moment. Just hold on. I'll do the setup now.
You're going to do the what? Oh, you're going to set it up now?
Yeah, I have connected to E0.
Yeah, E0 is going to be your local area network, your LAN, and then you'll just connect ETH1 to your internet connection. Just plug it into the switch, and then just turn it on.
Yeah. Here we are going to use all straight cables, right?
Yeah, you just use straight cables.
Not on.
Yeah, and then once you do that, you should be able to go to 192.168.10.1, which is the Ethernet address of the router on the LAN side. You can log
Okay.
also. Pardon me.
I'll just on these boxes. Are there any light indications?
Yeah, when you boot up the unit, I mean, you should see some lights on the. There should be a power light over the next to the USB ports, and also you should see little lights come on for the Ethernet ports when the unit boots up. Also, when the unit is fully booted, you'll see the 4 lights on the analog phone ports come on as well. It takes the router a few minutes to boot up.
It is already connected. Plug in data.
Just
Alag. Is a difference. One moment.
Yeah, sure.
It is going.
Yeah, you should see.
Hello?
Yeah, you should see a power indicator on the very right-hand corner. There should be a little LED, which is just a power. As soon as you plug it in, you should see that little light come on as green.
The Louis,
Yes.
power adapter for both the unit is same, right?
No.
Yes. Let's see the power adapter. Yeah, they both units run on 12 volts.
Okay.
So so either power adapter should work. The one for the 513 has a screw type adapter, so that you can actually plug it in and then just screw it on so that it doesn't come off.
Okay.
So it just takes it takes a minute for the router to boot up. So you'll just need to wait a minute or two, and then once it boots up, you should be able to hook up a PC to ETH0 or hook it up to a switch, and then you should get a DHCP address in the 192.168.10 subnet, and the IP address of the router is 192.168.10.1. When you go to redportglobal.com, you'll see there's a quick start guide listed there. You see that there, right there? That's the one sheet that basically just covers what we just covered. You might want to just download that and take a look at that one sheet and just get going. I just want to go through. There's a lot of material here. I mean, we could spend 2 days going over this router. So I just want to spend about an hour just to kind of orient you, and then point out some pointers, and then you're going to have to spend some time with the router playing with it and getting it configured, and I'm sure you'll have questions, at which point you'll either send us an email or call us so that we can help you with your specific configuration issue. But what I want to do right now is I want to kind of quickly go through the feature set so that you kind of get an orientation of how the router is laid out and where the different functionalities are and how to enable them, and not spend too much time hands-on with your particular router, because if we were to do that, it would take us a long time, and we have a lot of material to cover.
Okay.
So
So like
yeah, so once you get on, once your router is operational, you just go to 192.168.10.1, and you should see it should ask you for a username and a password. The username and the password is listed in the Quick Start guide. It's admin for the username and then web_access for the password. And once you do that, you'll be logged in to something that looks like this, which is the web interface to the unit.
admin, and what is the password?
It's web_access. I'll just type it in right here. Web_access, like that. And again, that's listed in the Quick Start guide. Now, the software I'm running is just
ACC.
CC?
E
SS.
SS.
yeah, web_access.
Initial.
Okay.
Yes.
Now this wizard will guide you through the initial configuration of web accelerator.
Yes, so it's basically running through a GUI right now, and it's asking you different questions on how to configure it. You should be able to just go through and run through with just all the defaults if you're using DHCP, and just answer the questions, and that will get you initially set up. It'll ask you it'll throw you into the WAN port and ask you how you want to configure the WAN port, and it'll ask you if you want to change the password for the admin and so forth. So you can just go ahead and answer the questions at your leisure there, and then eventually the router will come back and it'll display the main page just like you've got listed here.
Okay, that's good.
All right, so several things. I just want to go through just quickly some of the features and how you might configure this. Do you anticipate your installations to be single WAN installations, or do you anticipate them to be dual satellite system installations?
Okay. Now should we follow that steps in the 513?
If you want to,
It is
yeah,
asking.
you can just go ahead. It's only a few questions. You can just go ahead and accept mostly the defaults. The only one that will not let you through with the defaults is the one where it asks you for the password for the system administrator.
Okay.
So you might want to use web_access or change it to something, and then just remember what it is that you set it to.
That's for host name.
Host name, domain.
You could just
that's
leave
all.
you could just leave all that to be the default. I mean, you can change all of these parameters after the fact,
Okay.
and I'll show you how to change those after the fact. Normally, what I do is I just skip. I just don't even do the wizard. When it comes up, I just go back and I just put in 192.168.10.1 and then hit refresh, and then it'll go away and it'll take you straight to the screen with the defaults. But if you like, you can run through the defaults and change the password.
Very good. Okay. Now we have clicked the reload.
Yeah, it takes a few minutes. It takes a minute or so while it reconfigures itself, and then it gets all set up. And so in a minute or so, you'll want to basically just refresh the page to 192.168.10, or just click on the banner, and you'll be on this screen here. What time is it there?
Here it's 5:35.
Okay, yeah.
5:30.
All right, I think I hear the call to prayer in the background.
Correct. It's a Friday and it's an off day for us.
I see, okay. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It's quite a time difference, isn't it? It's just 8:30 here this morning.
Yeah, we are on the page.
Okay. So I'm just going to run through, and like I say, all this is discussed in the manual. So you basically have a standard web GUI. All of the features of the router are available through the web interface. Will you be running mostly on a single or dual WAN installation? In other words, will most of your installations be one satellite system, or do you anticipate them being two satellite systems?
Now to start with, all are single.
Okay, single. All right. Well, I'll focus on single because dual is a bit more complex, as you can imagine, and so why don't we just focus on single for today?
Okay.
You have to have a LAN. So you have to have a LAN interface and you have to have a WAN interface. All of your installations will use ETH0 for the LAN and ETH1 for the satellite system, for the fleet broadband and for the VSAT. Under the interfaces menu, go ahead.
Ethernet 1 is always VSAT or FBB.
That is correct. Ethernet 0 is going to be your LAN, and Ethernet 1 is going to be your WAN or your satellite system. You can switch them, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, but I would recommend not doing that. So under the interfaces menu, the ports are listed under the interfaces menu, and all of the routers that you receive from us will be pre-configured. And so, for example, if you go to interfaces WAN, this is how you configure the specific type of or the parameters for the satellite interface. Now, by default, you have DHCP enabled, which will work just fine for you because the fleet broadband by default is a DHCP server. And so the IP address for the main WAN port on the router will be acquired automatically, just like it is now. However, my recommendation, as it's indicated in the manual, is that you make these static. And so to make that port static, you would go ahead and just change that to static, and then you would go ahead and enter the IP address for the unit itself. You would make one up, 192.168.0. I don't know, 15 or whatever, and then you would put in the gateway. And so I like the static IP configuration better, not just because that way you'll always have a WAN configuration with an IP address in a default route, regardless of whether the fleet broadband is enabled or not. And so it's just a preferred way to do it. And this is especially true when we have a dual installation and you're going to be switching between the two fleet broadbands. It takes a little bit of time for the DHCP address to be acquired, and the system has to do quite a bit of configuration to configure itself once it acquires this DHCP address. And so the recommended mode of operation for production is to assign a static IP address to the WAN. You don't have to do it, but that's just a recommended one. And so you would do that by changing that here and then putting in an IP address which is in the same subnet as the fleet broadband, 192.168.0.12 for example, and then set it to 24 something like that, and then 192.168.0.1, and then hit save, and at that point that will save the configuration and make that a static IP address. And the save button is at the bottom of the screen.
DNS is not required?
We're going there. It's just not configured on this particular page.
Okay.
So this page is basically just dealing with the physical IP address of the unit. You'll notice that, for example, you can do pop over Ethernet. You can do a PPTP configuration, and so there's a couple things here for setting up the kind of WAN interface you have. For all of the installations we've done to date on ships, basically the only thing we've ever needed to do here is change that to static or DHCP depending on what you want, and then just hit the save button. Under the LAN interface, it's much simpler. You can change the subnet for the LAN. 192.168.10.1 is the default, and so I would recommend leaving it like that. But a lot of vessels already have networks on board, and so you have to change that. And so this is where you would change that.
Okay.
Bridge width, what is that option?
Bridge width?
Okay, that's so. For example, the bridge width. say you wanted to have the each one of the Ethernet ports on the back of the unit is a separate Ethernet port, so it's not a switch. But say, for example, you wanted ETH0 and ETH2 to be part of the same network, then the bridge would allow you to bridge those interfaces. And so this basically allows you, for example, to bridge with WAN2, which means that at that point, anything hooked up to WAN2, which is ETH2 and ETH0, would be on the same physical network. But I'm not going to recommend that you do the bridging. If you want more Ethernet ports on the LAN, just use a switch, which is what you'll use. So that's what the bridging is for. I wouldn't recommend using it, but you can bridge and turn effectively the Ethernet ports on the router into the equivalent of a switch by using the bridging.
Okay.
But it only works with two.
Right.
It only works with two ports, right? So you can take ETH0 and bridge it to ETH2, and that's it. You're done. So at that point, anything hooked up to ETH0 will be on the LAN. Anything hooked up to ETH2 will also be on the LAN. But we don't ever run in that configuration because we have so few Ethernet ports on the back of the router. You really would just use a switch or a smart switch. And so the bridging is not something that I would recommend you do, and just don't touch it. Just leave it on none. This is important, however. One of the things that you'll find is that the router has a lot of proxy servers running on board. It has a DHCP server, it has a DNS server, it has an FTP proxy server to aid in the FTP process. It has a HTTP web services and web proxy server on board. It has a mail server on board. It has a lot of different proxy servers on board. And so one of the things that you need to be careful is that there's buttons on here, for example, FTP, that that enable and disable the different proxy services. Now, the proxy services, when they're enabled on the box, create firewall rules which allow people on the LAN to access them, and they take precedence over the firewall rule. So we haven't talked about the firewall rule, but often we have a situation where people put in, for example, a firewall rule to block FTP, but FTP continues to work. And the reason for that is because FTP, there's firewall rules that are created automatically to ease the setup for the administrator, and those firewall rules, when the proxy service is enabled on the router itself, will create a firewall rule which has higher priority. So if you want to disable FTP on the vessel, which most people do because FTP is not something that you would want to do directly, you do it through a browser using port 80, or I'm sorry, you don't normally do FTP on the vessels. You would do downloads through HTTP. You would just basically need to disable the user land FTP proxy application. As soon as you do that, then FTP is disabled on the router, and users will not be able to do FTP. Okay, so that's what that is. That's just an FTP helper. FTP, just for historic reasons here, FTP is a protocol that was invented before NAT existed, Network Address Translation. FTP was invented back in the late 70s, and so it doesn't play very well with Network Address Translation. And so to aid with that, there's actually a proxy server, and when you enable this, all FTP requests are transparently routed to the proxy application that's running on the server, so that it can go ahead and do the downloads no matter what NAT environment you're in. And so that's why that exists. Okay, anyway, so that's just kind of an aside. By default, it's enabled, so you'll need to disable it if you don't want the users to do FTP. Just for your information only, under Interfaces Assign, This is how you assign basically the different functionality to the different ports. And so under the interface assignment, you'll notice that VR0 is the actual interface for the LAN. That's ETH0, and it's assigned to the LAN functionality. And so you can just basically switch these around, and this is how you would change them around. So if you wanted the WAN port to be ETH0 and the LAN port to be ETH1, you could come in here and you could switch them around by just mapping the MAC address to the different functionality. Also, if you go to the WAN 2, you'll notice that you can actually change the name of that and assign it to a specific functionality, Fleet Broadband, Iridium Open Port, whatever you want to. That name then gets reflected back throughout the entire router. So if I were to take WAN 2 and replace it and change it to FBB, then whenever you try to reference that interface, it will have the name FBB. You notice that we have one called VoIP, which is the interface that's assigned to the VoIP unit internally for the 513. The LAN designators and the WAN designators cannot be changed, but all of the other designators on the router can be. And so you'll just need to know that WAN is your primary satellite unit, and it is mapped to ETH1, which is got a physical interface name of VR1, but you'll never see the physical interface of VR1 anywhere in the router again. This is the only place where it's actually addressed.
Okay. Okay. Clear.
You'll notice that you've got a VLAN tab, and this is where you would actually add VLANs. And so if you wanted to do VLANs because you had subnets and you had physical subnets on the vessel, this is where you would actually configure your VLANs. We have a nice little addendum guide that explains how to add a Cisco.
Just a minute. We'll just interrupt.
Yep.
Where is this line? VLAN, we did not find it. Under interfaces?
Under interface, yeah. If you go to interfaces, assign,
Okay.
you'll see the VLAN tab,
Okay.
and this is where you map your VLANs. So if you had a VLAN switch, which many of the larger vessels have because they have different subnets, and they use VLANs to manage the subnets, this is where you would assign the VLANs and interface. We do have a very nice, if you go back to redportglobal.com, there's a very nice little firewall, there's an addendum there called the Redport Satellite Firewall Addendum VLAN. That addendum shows you how to add a Cisco Business Smart Switch to the web accelerator for adding additional WAN ports to the web accelerator. So if you're going to be using VLANs, I recommend you take a look at that guide. You assign the VLANs here by just going to by configuring your switch and then going ahead and putting in your VLAN tag and your description and then the physical interface that that VLAN is attached to. And so that guide will go ahead and describe that. I'm not going to talk about the VLANs today, but just know that that's where you configure the VLANs, and there's a separate document that addresses configurations of VLANs for you.
Okay.
All right. So after you've configured the interfaces, you want to go to General Setup under System. General Setup under System. So here is where you've got the host name for the machine, and it shows up in the top right hand corner. The domain, again, right hand top hand corner, so you can change the domain if you like. And here's where you set up your DNS servers. So if you're setting a static IP address for your WAN, then you would need to come in here and set up your DNS servers. You put in the IP address. Say for example, if you were using Google, you could just use 8.8.8.8. You can use whatever DNS servers. You can actually use the Fleet Broadband itself. The Fleet Broadband has a caching DNS server. And so you can put that in there. One recommendation that you might want to consider, and this is discussed in the manual, is to use the IP addresses of OpenDNS. Are you familiar with OpenDNS?
OpenDNS.
Yes, OpenDNS is a service. I'm just going to mention this and just make you familiar with OpenDNS. First of all, it's a free service. And what it allows you to do is it allows you from LAN to do management filtering by DNS. So for example, if you wanted to block social media, or you wanted to block the pornographic sites, or you wanted to block you know, different content, the simplest way to do that is with DNS. And OpenDNS will allow you to do that very easily. So you can, for example, let me just, I'm just going to, I don't want to spend a lot of time on OpenDNS, but I'm just going to make you aware of this feature because it's free and it's very nice. And you can come in here and you can, let's see, specify, for example, what kind of protection you want against different sites. And then you can actually go in here and you can customize your sites and specify what you want to block and what you want to allow on your specific sites. So that gives the administrator shore-side control of the web content that the vessel has access to without actually having to log into the vessel and create a bunch of proxy filtering rules for that particular vessel. And so each vessel can have its own entry in this service. Or if you want to pay for the service, you can have all of your vessels just have one portal, and then you can go in here and just with a click of a button manage the content that that vessel is receiving on the web just by enabling and disabling the different classifications. So OpenDNS is it's a DNS server. The IP addresses are listed on the bottom of the page, 192.168.22, and so you'll see in all of our documentation that we basically use these IP addresses in their OpenDNS. So if you don't have an OpenDNS account, it's just a DNS server that's on the internet. If you have an OpenDNS account, then you can bind your particular router to an account on the DNS server, and then you can go in there and control access to the internet just by going to the web portal and enabling and disabling the different categories. And the way that works is whenever a user goes to a specific site, www.google.com, it requests the DNS entry from the router. The router will then use the OpenDNS routers to do the query, and if you blocked Facebook, for example, or social media, then the resolution will fail. There'll be no A record for that particular domain, and therefore the user can't go to that web page. So just a recommendation. It's free and it's really nice, and there's other ways to do filtering on the router, and I'll show you how to do that. But it involves getting on board the vessel and actually creating router rules. The other thing to note here, and I'll just mention that, is that you can actually bind the DNS server to a specific port so that all requests for that DNS server go through that port. If you use the default gateway, then it'll just use whatever the default gateway is in the routing table. Otherwise, if you've got like a multiple WAN installation where you're doing load balancing, you would want to have some DNS servers bound always to one port and then others bound to different ports. So no matter which interface is down, you've got a route to the specific DNS servers. And so for your single WAN installations, you can just leave it at the default. But if you were doing multiple ports or load balancing or failover, then you would want to go in here and actually bind the DNS servers to a specific port. And again, there's the big discussion about that in the manual, in the setup section of the manual. All right, so going through here, allow DNS server list to be overridden by DHCP. If you're using DHCP and you have this checked, then you can put whatever DNS servers you want here. They will be overridden because it'll take the DNS service from the DHCP server, which in your case is a Fleet Broadband, in which case your DNS servers would then be the ones allocated by Inmarsat. If you uncheck this, then even if you have DHCP enabled for the WAN, it'll go ahead and use the ones that you've specified here for the router. Now, to be clear here, These are the DNS servers that are used by the router and not necessarily the DNS servers that are used by the clients, and you can configure those in a separate panel, which I'll show you. So username, admin, password, and so forth. One thing is the router does synchronize time over the internet. It's enabled by default. If you're running on a 10 megabyte plan or a very small plan with very expensive airtime, you might want to disable that, just because the time sync does take traffic, and that traffic basically is bandwidth that the end user has to pay for. So by default it's enabled. Just know that you know, it could cause a trickle of bandwidth consumption if you leave it on. All right, so that's, once you've done that, basically your router is set up. There's some other advanced features in here which I really don't want to go over right now, but there's a lot of buttons on the router. The pertinent ones are all discussed in the manual, and so I'll move forward. Just know that there's a lot of different system parameters and configurations that can be enabled and disabled. For example, the box has SSH access. If you want to disable SSH access, you can just uncheck this and hit save. At that point, you can't SSH into the box. We like to be able to SSH into the box because if we're doing remote management and we're on a really slow connection, then the CLI is a lot less intense than the GUI. Anyway, so I'll just point those out to you. Okay, the next thing I want to focus on is the firewall, because the firewall configuration is considerably different for this router than it is for the Cisco boxes, and it's important to understand how setting up how the firewall rule setup is done. There's an administrative function called firewall, which allows you to do a number of different firewall and NAT port forwarding functions, including a traffic shaper for doing quality of service. We'll talk about that here in a second, but let's just focus on the rules. One thing that is important to understand is that the firewall only applies to inbound traffic to the router. So what you do is you allow or you block traffic into the router. Once data is in the router, then it's allowed out. There is no way to block outbound traffic through a port. You can only block inbound traffic through a port, which means that if traffic can get in through an interface into the router, it will be able to get out of the router. So this is a lot different than a lot of the routers, including, for example, if you were using Linux with IP tables. And IP tables, you can block things coming in, you can block things going out. With this particular router, you can only block or allow things coming into coming in through an interface. Now, the advantage of doing it that way is that it really makes the configuration of the firewalls much simpler, because when you want to, for example, allow or block traffic originating from the LAN, you go to the LAN tab and you create a rule, which is a pass rule or a block rule on the LAN, and you're done. So so each interface, whether it be a physical interface or a VLAN trunk that has been configured as a WAN interface, will have a tab that shows up here. Your VPNs will also have a tab that shows up here. And so every one of these tabs corresponds to the firewall rules that allow or disallow traffic into the router through that specific port. All right? The other thing to note is that the rules are applied top down. Once a packet arrives into the router, it starts traversing the rules first come, first serve, and it'll stop as soon as it finds a match. So if you have a allow all at the top, like I have right now, and then I add a rule on the bottom, which is a block rule, you'll never hit the block rule because as soon as the packet comes in, it matches the first rule. It's an allow rule. It's allowed in. So you got to keep in mind when designing your firewall rules that the rules are evaluated from top down. So you want all your block rules on the top and all your allow rules on the bottom. If you have no rule at all, then basically it's blocked. So it's a deny policy is what we use, and you have to specifically allow the traffic that you want. By default, the way the routers come, they're totally 100% open. You have allow rules on the LAN, you have allow rules on the WAN, you have allow rules on the WAN 2, and you also on the VoIP interface is totally open, and so basically the router is totally open. So the first thing you'll want to do is you'll want to start customizing your firewall rules to prevent traffic coming out of the route into the router and then out of your WAN ports consequently. Traffic wall rules are very easy to configure. There's these little icons on the right hand side. The little plus on the top will add a rule above. The little plus on the bottom will add a rule after, and a little plus on the very bottom will add it at the very bottom of the list. And of course you can reorganize the list at any point. So you can add a rule by just clicking on the plus. That brings up a GUI. The pass rule, so you can do a pass, block, or reject. You can enable, disable the rule. You specify the interface on which that rule applies. So by default, this will be enabled for the tab that you selected. The protocol, so you can specify whether this is a TCP only, UDP, or anything. You can block by source. You can block by OS type.
Louis, just a moment.
Sure.
Just a moment. We did not get this page, the page which you are in.
Okay, so you go to firewall rules. Go to firewall rules. Click on the LAN because we're creating a LAN rule, and then move over to the plus. You see, there's a little plus on the right-hand side.
Okay.
Yes.
Fine.
And so if you click on the plus on the very top, it'll add it above. If you click on the little plus here, it'll add it right above the rule you're at. And then if you click the plus on the bottom, it will add it to the very bottom of the list. The little excess delete are deletes. And so I want to add a rule at the very top of the list. And that will get me to this form, which is a form which allows me to create the firewall rules. And you just fill out the form with what the rule you want. So this is going to be for example, I can do a block rule. I can specify the port, but this is going to be on the LAN. I can specify the protocol. I can specify the source port. For example, I can say, I can specify the source. This is anything. So for example, I'm coming from the LAN. So any subnet on the LAN, for example, will be filtered, or I can specify a LAN address, so forth, or I can specify an IP address. So I can come in here and say a single host, for example, and I can say this rule applies to 192.168.10.112, for example. I can specify the OS type. Only Macintoshes will be filtered, for example. So there are the different operating systems that you can filter by. The destination, again, any protocol. I'm going to, in this particular case, block port 80. And I can specify a schedule. For example, this rule applies to from 6 p.m. to midnight or whatever. I can give it a name, test rule, and then I can hit save. And you'll notice that created a firewall rule for me. So it's at the top, so it gets evaluated before the rule on the bottom, and it's a block rule. So this rule says, hey, if you have traffic coming from this IP address, right, from any port going to any host on port 80 through any gateway basically block it. So that will basically block HTTP from this host.
What is in the action? What is the difference on block and reject?
Okay, in block, basically what will happen is it'll just go ahead and the traffic comes to the router and it sends no acknowledgments back to the client. So if you try to go to port 80, it just hangs. If you do a reject, then that generates a TCP reject acknowledgement, and so the packet is rejected and the client knows that the packet was rejected. So a reject and a block do the same thing. They do not allow traffic through, but in one case the sender, the originator, is informed that the request was rejected, and so you get an error message right away. In the other case, basically it just sits there and it hangs because the router generates no responses back. Typically you want to use block.
Luis, can you repeat it? We went blank in the middle.
Okay, so this has to do with TCP, with the TCP protocol. In the case of a block, your PC or your originator sends the request, it comes to the router, and the router basically blocks it, but sends no rejection notice back to the client.
Okay.
In the case of rejection, it does. And so what happens is if you have a block rule and you try to connect to that port or to that service, nothing happens. The client just sits there and eventually times out. If you have a reject, then you just get an immediate, oh, connection rejected, and you get a connection rejected error message. So you can use either connect, block, or reject. When you're on the WAN port, you normally always want to use block because you don't want to let the user know that you even got a firewall sitting at that particular thing, and so you just never respond and you just ignore the requests. The pass is obviously a pass. So you come in here, you select the interface that this rule applies, and then basically whether it's a subnet, a network, an interface, you can specify a host. I mean, you can specify what it is that you want to block. You can specify the destination that you want to block. Maybe you want to block a single host. You want to block an entire subnet. You want to block everything that's on the one going out through the WAN port. I mean, you've got specified the destination, specify the port range. You specify the port range, and then you hit save, and that creates the firewall rule, which looks like that. Okay, and so we've created a rule that says this rule only applies to TCP. I keep clicking on this because I want to highlight it, but I shouldn't. So it says there's a rule that says this only applies to TCP. It applies only to the IP address 192.168.12. Any port originating from any TCP port originating from this IP address is going to be affected by this rule. Going to any destination IP address on port 80 will be blocked. So at this point, this particular IP address, anybody at this IP address cannot get to port 80. It is being blocked by the firewall.
Okay.
All right, and so since it's being blocked, it's blocked. Again, you can create similar rules for the WAN. I can disable this rule. So I've disabled the rule, and so now this is a block. In other words, nobody can log in through the WAN because I've disabled the rule. Or I can re-enable it by just clicking on it, or I can just delete it. I mean, I could just go ahead and just delete the WAN port. If I do that, then of course I'll block myself out because I'm using the WAN to show you this demonstration, and so I don't want to apply these rules. So that's pretty simple. I mean, you just go through and you decide what your rule set is going to be, what's going to be allowed and not allowed, and you just go ahead and create the rules, keeping in mind that, again, summing up, each one of these tabs corresponds to inbound traffic only, and rules apply from top down. So I talked about schedules. You can create a schedule which will allow you to create a rule that is applied for a specific time of day or a specific period. So you would do that by just going ahead and creating a schedule. And you would come in here and you could specify the date, the time, the description, start time, stop time, applies on specific dates, blah, blah, blah. You give it a name so that you can say, for example, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., no one can browse the internet. You create the rule, and then you come over here and you go to your firewall rules, and when you edit your firewall rules, you'll notice that over here there is a schedule section. Okay, source, destination. And here it is, schedule right here. And then you can select the schedule that you just created, and then this firewall rule only applies to that schedule. So, so when you go to match that firewall rule, it has to be within the scheduled time. Otherwise, the firewall rule won't be matched, and it'll go down to the next one for evaluation. The other thing, of course, is down. You can specify what Ethernet port this gateway applies to. This route applies to, and so if you apply it to the default route, it applies to any rule that is going to be routed through the default route. But you can also specify a specific interface, which means that when you have multiple WAN installations that have multiple satellites, like a VSAT and a fleet broadband, you can say this rule only applies to the fleet broadband. That means that users on the VSAT system can browse the internet. But if you fail over to fleet broadband, then the firewall rule comes into effect and HTTP is blocked for the fleet broadband. This allows you to have filtering rules that apply when you're using one interface and not another interface. So you've got firewall rules that apply for inbound traffic on each one of the interfaces that also apply, can be bound to specific outbound interfaces. So this allows you to block HTTP coming from the LAN if it's going to the fleet broadband, but allow HTTP if it's coming from the LAN going to the VSAT system. So just keep that in mind. We're not doing multi-WAN right now, but this is an important feature for allowing or disallowing different kinds of traffic through different satellite systems. Typically, when you have a dual satellite installation, you have a cheap satellite system and an expensive satellite system. When you fail over to the expensive satellite system, you want to block all the traffic except the essential business traffic for the vessel.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So that's all I'm going to talk about this video. I mean, there's a lot in here. Go ahead.
Please, one question is there.
Yeah, sure.
Suppose if under rule we choose none on the schedule, it should be always it should be applied
Always.
all the time.
That is correct. So if you come down here, the default is schedule none. That means that it'll be applied all the time. That's what most people use. It's very rare for a vessel to use schedules, but they're there if you want to use them. Okay, that's all I'm going to really talk about here. I mean, that's really the critical one, is the firewall rules and the schedules. We can do network address translation, but once you start doing that, then you're actually doing something fancy. So I'm not going to go there. And again, the traffic shaper for fleet broadband, there is no downbound traffic shaping. You can do traffic shaping on the upbound link, but most traffic is on the down link, and so the traffic shaper doesn't help fleet broadband installations very much. All right, services. This is a very large category, and it has a lot of very important stuff in it that I'm going to cover fairly quickly, and then refer you back to the manual. Under services, this is where you have most of the proxy servers that are running on the thing. Let's just start with a simple one, the DHCP server. So, for example, there's a DHCP server that serves DHCP addresses to your LAN. It's enabled. If you want no DHCP on the LAN, this is how you disable it. This is where you specify the range for your DHCP addresses. It also specifies the DNS servers that you hand out to your DHCP clients on the local area, on the LAN. So if you want the DNS servers for the LAN to be different than your router, then you would go ahead and specify them here. If they're blank, then what will happen is the router itself will be used as the DNS server for the LAN, in which case if you take a look at the IP configurations for your PCs on the LAN, the DNS server will be 192.168.10.1, which is the router itself. And so it'll use the DNS server that is on the router, which in turn uses the DNS servers that are configured in the default tab under the general. But if you wanted for some reason to change them, this is where it is. And again, if you wanted to change the gateway to something other than the default, which is going to be the router, then you would change that here. So this is where you go ahead and configure the DHCP. And one nice thing down here is you've got, like most routers, you've got a static table. So you can go ahead and assign a static IP address to a machine on the network by binding its MAC address to a specific IP address. And there's a way of doing that dynamically from a different location, but just know that this is where you control who gets what IP address on the interface that has the DHCP enabled. Captive portal. Let me just talk about the captive portal very quickly. It's very easy to enable. Captive portal is a very important tool for you. It's what allows you to enable pin code access to the internet for your crew. So by default it is disabled. As soon as you enable the captive portal and you bind it to a specific port, for example in this case the LAN, any user wanting to browse the internet will be presented with a login page. Before he can access the internet, he's going to have to enter a PIN code to access the internet. That PIN code will restrict access to the internet for that user in a number of different ways. You can specify that the PIN code is a 10 megabyte PIN code. When the user logs in, a counter will start. Once that user has consumed 10 megabytes of data, the user will be logged out and he will not be allowed to access the internet again until he enters another PIN code. All right? So a lot of our customers use this to control bandwidth on VLAs. We have one customer, for example, that does 10 gigabyte VLAs. The crew gets 8 gigabytes worth of PIN codes every month, and they can use 8 gigabytes of data however they want to, but once that 8 gigabytes is consumed, they can't use any more until the next month. Another thing that you can do with the PIN codes, which is very nice, is you can throttle them back. So that 10 megabyte PIN code that we were discussing, you can say, hey, that PIN code will run no faster than 64 kbps. So although you might have 400 kbps on your fleet broadband, a user using a PIN code that has been activated for 64 kbps will only ever get 64 kbps of bandwidth. That way when he starts to download or he goes to watch a YouTube video, he will be restricted to 64 kbps, allowing most of the bandwidth to be available for the vessel business. All right? So the captive portal is a very important tool. Pardon me?
But in fleet broadband, YouTube is already blocked, right? From the website.
It is not. You have to block it. And I'll show you where to do that when we talk about that. But that was just an example. Instead of using YouTube, how about downloading a file? He goes to download a file from the internet, and when he goes to do that, he'll never be able to use more than 64 kbps of bandwidth downloading that file.
That's clear. That's clear.
Okay? If he were on a VSAT system where you... Pardon me?
Yeah. Yes, actually, I want to know this captive portal. Is it possible to create different bandwidth captive portal for different kind of users?
Yes. So what you have is when you order the PIN codes, you just specify what the parameters are that you want in that PIN code, and let me just show you what they are. So I'm just going to take you real quickly to our web portal that generates the PIN codes, so that you can just basically see what your options are. So this is not something that you would see or the user would see, but when you order PIN codes from us, here are your options. You can specify whether it's a PIN code that works on time, i.e. it runs for 2 hours and it turns off, or whether it works on data. You can specify the speed. So, for example,
No, no, no. Actually, we lost.
pardon me?
Louis,
Yes.
We are not in this page. We lost.
You're not seeing my screen?
is it in your website?
No, no, no. Are you looking at my
Yeah,
screen?
screen is clear.
Okay, so it
Oh,
says
it's-
it says Web Accelerator. Yeah, this is not on the router. This is when you order pin codes from us.
Okay, okay.
This is the form that we use. This is a form that we use to generate the pin codes for you. And the only reason
Okay,
the only reason I brought you here is so that you could see what the options are for generating pin codes.
Okay.
So, for example, when we generate a pin code for you, you can say I want the pin codes to be 64 kbps, and I want them to last for 100 megabytes. So we say 100 megabytes. We can specify that they work only during a specific time of day, and whether they're locked to the specific router. So you tell us how big you want the pin code, when the pin code is going to be available, in this case, any time of day or night, and what speed the pin code runs at. And then we'll generate those pin codes for you. And then we just email them to you and you give them to the end user.
Okay, that's clear.
Right? And so you can have a pin code that works with 100 megabytes, or you can have a pin code that is good for 2 hours or 3 hours or 12 hours or 24 hours. It's totally up to you. You specify what it was and how many pin codes, and then we'll just send them to you. And you know, you might buy them in groups of 1,000, for example. The user, getting back to the router, the user then basically logs that in, and that gets in. So to enable the captive portal in that feature, all you have to do is just click Enable Captive Portal and hit Save at the bottom, and then all of a sudden, anybody trying to access the internet is going to be asked for a PIN code. Now,
Okay.
go ahead.
With one question today. In that case, if that pin code comes along with the bandwidth restriction, then under captive portal there is an option called pre-user bandwidth restriction. What is that used for?
Okay, so right, see right here, pre-user bandwidth restriction. So if the PIN code has no bandwidth restriction, then this is the maximum any user on the system can use. So a PIN code may have bandwidth restrictions or no bandwidth restriction. If the PIN code has no bandwidth restriction, then the overall global bandwidth restriction applies. And so that right now is set to 512 kbps, which is for Fleet Broadband is totally open. But if you had a 2 megabit connection with a VSAT, for example, no user would be able to download anything faster than 512 kbps. So this is a global parameter.
Okay.
This is a global parameter. You'll also know that you've got pass-through MAC addresses. So for example, you can whitelist. You can say everyone on the ship gets to use a PIN code except for the captain.
Okay.
But the per user bandwidth restriction also applies to the captain, even though he doesn't have to log in or put in a PIN code, because he's still running through the captive portal. And so this is just an overall global maximum, but then you can actually apply something more restrictive to the PIN codes.
Okay, and suppose in the pre-user bandwidth restriction, if we say it's set up to suppose 128K.
Yes.
There is a pin code generated in say 256K. So will it work in 256K
Okay.
if we set up the bandwidth?
So what will happen is I can't remember if the per user bandwidth restriction takes priority over the PIN code or not. So if you have a 256, if you've got the user bandwidth restriction set to 128 and you've sent somebody a 256 PIN code, I'm not sure what will happen. I have a feeling that the 256 PIN code will take priority over this, because I believe that this is only applied if the PIN code has no bandwidth restriction, but I can't remember. Typically, vessels in every installation that I know of has a per user bandwidth restriction set high, and then they use the pin codes to restrict from that, and not the other way around.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, I would have to take a look at that, because that would be a new one on me, because we've never seen that set up. But I can't remember when we did this a long time ago. I can't remember what the rules apply. So the other nice thing about the pin codes is that they have CDRs. All right. So every user is logged, and so you have a CDR for every pin code user for the entire session. So let me just give a demo of what that looks like. Just give me half a second here. I'm going to go find a pin code. Let's see. I got to go find a pin code. Just bear with me a second.
One-time solution.
Okay, so sorry about that. So I just went to the server logs on our servers, and I just found a user that was actually using the service, and that was his pin code number. So I can just go ahead and enter that into this form, and this will give me a CDR. This particular user is allowed no faster than 64 kbps.
Okay.
He has a data limit of 100 megabytes.
Okay.
He has used 83 megabytes of his allotment.
Okay.
And here are his sessions. He's logged in 3 times. And this is the number of bytes that he consumed during those sessions, and these are the times he logged in. And this is the duration of the session. This is how long the session ran.
Okay.
So that's very nice, because you can go back, and for any pin code that you assign to a specific user, you can see what he did when he logged in and how much data he transmitted. All right. So I'll let you, again, read the section on the captive portal and experiment with it. We'll generate some pin codes for you so that you can play with it and see how it works. But it's pretty straightforward. The next thing I want to talk about is the proxy server.
Okay.
This is the web proxy server. So we have a proxy server which captures all HTTP traffic and does a number of things. One, it caches it. So there's an onboard cache on the proxy server, on the router, that caches any pages that come over the internet, so that when a user downloads that page, it is cached on the server, so that when another user on another computer tries to access that page comes from the cache and not from the internet.
Okay.
Okay.
That
So, where, for example, a user went to google.com and downloaded a file of like 10 MB.
yes.
So that 10 MB will be saved, or only the link to that is saved?
No, the file is saved. Any data that is transmitted over port 80 is saved.
Okay. Oh.
Okay.
Okay. So for example, your Windows updates and your virus signatures are cached. So that a person does a Windows update and downloads a Windows update for a PC. That Windows update might be, 130 megabytes. It's stored in the cache, so that the next guy that does a Windows update will get that Windows update from the cache.
Okay.
This is a fairly complex piece of software. There's nothing for you to do here except for enabling compression. By default, compression is disabled. It's under the compression tab. So right now we're under services, proxy server.
Okay.
and it's on by default and is on the LAN port by default. So you'll notice that transparent proxy is enabled. That means that anybody who tries to access the internet on port 80 is going to access the proxy server. If you want to disable it, you uncheck that. That disables the proxy server. But I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to run the proxy server. The proxy server is one of the reasons people buy this unit. So it's on by default. There's nothing to do here. It's on. So you get caching by default. Compression, however, is a premium service that the end user has to pay for. We charge you $50 a month for that. If you have a lot of vessels, you have the option of buying your own proxy server for a fixed monthly price.
Okay.
To enable compression, you click on the compression tab, you enable compression, and you enter a username and a password. And you hit save. As soon as you do that, traffic from that router is passed through our upstream proxy servers and is compressed. On average, HTTP traffic is compressed by a factor of 3 to 5.
3 to
5
Oh,
times. So that means that if you have a 10 gigabyte plan,
Okay.
effectively you have 30 to 50 gigabytes of web access. Not only that, but you also have caching.
Okay, I would interrupt.
Yes.
How effective is this compression on smaller plans like 200 MB?
Okay, so the web compression does a number of things. Let me explain to you what it does. First of all, it removes all the ads.
Okay.
It takes all your images and it resamples the images. So if you're running at maximum compression, every image you download is turned into a JPEG with a quality of 5. So the images are very, very blocky, but the images are about 5% of their original size. So a 200 kilobyte image turns into a 5 kilobyte image. It takes all text and it compresses it into gzip streams. So effectively, if you go to a page that has a lot of pictures like CNN.com, you get tremendous improvement in performance. So for example, CNN.com is typically 1.2 megabytes. When you run it through our compression server, it's 400 kilobytes.
Okay.
Hotmail.com, to log into hotmail.com, is 4.4 megabytes just to log into hotmail.com. If you use the proxy server, it's 600 kilobytes.
Okay.
So it will make a dramatic difference in the performance of your web browsing. But it only works with HTTP. We can't compress HTTPS because HTTPS is encrypted, and by definition an encrypted stream cannot be compressed because it's randomized.
Okay. So I have a question, like for example, on my fleet broadband,
Yes.
I have not enabled internet usage. That is, HTTP is blocked.
Yes.
I have only given permission to use Amos Connect
For email, yeah.
through the fleet broadband
Yes.
under 200 MB plan.
Right.
So will be compression in that?
No, this compression is only for HTTP.
Okay.
Amos Connect implements the compression for email.
Okay.
So your email is compressed because Amos Connect compresses the email.
Okay. So my vessels running on 200 MB plan
Will not be using this.
only Amos Connect running on that.
Yep.
This compression is not useful.
That is
this
correct.
Compression box.
No, not unless you want to let the captain browse the internet.
Clear.
Okay, but if you're going to block the internet, then this is this is not going to do any good for you because this is only for web compression.
Okay, clear.
Yeah, for a VLA, most of the traffic is web traffic.
Okay, VLA or unlimited plans or whatever.
Right, and since you're blocking HTTP, you know, YouTube and everything else, I mean, you don't have 200 megabyte plans, so that doesn't matter. You're going to block all those anyway. Okay, so that basically takes care of the proxy server. I want to talk about the proxy filter. That's an add-on to the proxy server, which allows you to restrict access. Say, for example, you only wanted users on that 200 megabyte plan to access the corporate website. Or maybe the crew is using something like Ocean Pay, which is a service that is used for paying and applying credits for the crew for their pay. You want to allow them to access that website. What you can do is you can go to the proxy filter and you can specify destinations that are allowed and then block everything else. So that's under services, proxy filter. It's a fairly complicated piece of software that allows you to block or enable different websites. And so you can specify a block rule that says block all web access except for oceanpay.com, for example, or whatever the name of the course. So that allows web browsing of very, very specific, only specific websites, like for example, websites that belong to the corporate head office.
Okay.
And again, there's a very large section in the manual that discusses that. One of the nice side benefits of the proxy server is that under status proxy report, what you will see is a list of all the IP addresses by date that access the internet. So for example, on December the 3rd, I'm sorry, on March the 12th, this is a new router, so there's nothing on it, but on March the 12th, a total of 700 kilobytes was transmitted over the web. If I click on March the 12th, I'll see that the IP address, it lists the IP address, that was generated from IP address 192.168.10.199. You will notice that there was a 100% hit ratio on the cache. So although we tried to access the web, everything that we wanted to access on the web was already in the cache. I can click on that and I can basically see the web pages that were accessed and the cache hit ratios. Let's see. This is the size. This is the size of the item that was downloaded, and this is the percent of the total traffic on that particular day that was used for this particular connection. And we went to that page 22 times. So I've got very detailed record of every web page that every user went to for any time on this particular device. This is very powerful because when you configure a VLA, what you do is you configure remote access and you log in periodically and you take a look at these reports and see what the users are doing. For example, Facebook. Oh, they're not supposed to go to Facebook. Then you go and you put in a filter rule to block Facebook. And so you can see what websites they're going to and what traffic is being generated and what they're doing, and then customize the filtering rules for that particular vessel to optimize the bandwidth.
Okay.
Very powerful. Okay, go ahead.
I would interrupt.
Yes.
See, the additional payment I'm paying for compression, right?
You're paying for compression only. You're not paying for any of the. You're not paying for any of the caching, and you're not paying for any of the logging.
Okay. So, in case if I am on a VSAT, I will be promoting 513.
Yes.
For all the internal caching and report generation, all the steps.
That is correct. And if they don't want voice, you can promote the 303.
No, because 513 is already having a VoIP. So
That is correct. But if they don't want VoIP and they only want the routing, then that you can do the 303. The 303 is the router only unit,
okay,
and the 513 is a 303 and a 404. So yeah, so the 513 is a good unit. If you for a VSAT customer, the 513 is perfect because they want voice because they don't have voice. VSAT doesn't provide voice, so you want to provide the VoIP service, and 513 is good. But they will get very, very efficient browsing because of these features that I have just listed.
okay, clear.
All right, so that's all I'm going to talk about the services. We're going to come to VoIP here in a minute. I want to talk about remote access.
Yeah.
There's 3 ways to access the router remotely. One of them is just through the web, right? So in order to access the unit, you have to have a static IP address for the satellite system. You can get that from your provider. I don't know who you're buying Fleet Broadband Airtime from. Who are you buying Fleet Broadband Airtime from?
Stratos.
Stratus, fine. So you just tell Stratus that you need a static IP address. And then you can just bring up this web GUI. You can bring up this web GUI over the interface and do everything we're doing over the WAN port. You notice that I'm connected to 192.168.0.7,
Okay.
which is the WAN port. I'm doing all of this through the WAN port on this router. So that's the first way to do it, which is really nice because you've got all these reporting tools. You also have VPN. So you can actually create a VPN server and then use PPTP to connect to the vessel. What's really nice about that is that once you establish a PPTP VPN connection, your PC at your shop is on the LAN of the vessel, which means that you have access to any printer or any computer on the vessel as if it were connected to your office. All right? The IP address of your machine, at your office is going to be in the same subnet as the IP address of the computers on your LAN. So your office will receive a 192.168.10 address. And so you can do so you can manage the internal network on the vessel as if you were on the vessel using a PC on their network.
Okay.
This is very powerful for VSAT because a lot of the VSATs need to have adjustments. For example, when they change regions of the ocean, or if server, whatever the. So if they got issues, and so what you can do is you can just log in through Fleet Broadband with PPTP,
Okay.
and then you can just bring up the web interface for the VSAT controller and fix it as if you were on the ship.
Okay, that's clear.
All right. And setting up a PPTP thing is very simple. Macintoshes, Windows, Linux, they all support PPTP natively. And you just need to give it the IP address, the username, and the password. So when you set up a PPTP configuration, you create a user, and then when you configure your Mac or whatever, so if I go here to my Macintosh, and I go to my network settings, let's see wherever they are, network settings, network here. So here is for example, Civil Star. Here's a ship. I just give it the IP address, I give it the account, the username, and the password, and I say connect, and voila, my Macintosh is now connected to that ship, and I can do whatever I need to on that ship.
Okay.
So there's a nice section in the manual on VPN and PPTP on how to configure it. That's a very powerful feature that I highly recommend. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is just basically traffic graphing.
Okay.
There's some very nice tools for analyzing the traffic on the vessel. So for example, these are RDR graphs. There's not much happening on this router because this is in the office. But I can get, for example, on the WAN port, detailed traffic reports over 4 hours, 16 hours, 2 days, 1 month, 6 months, and a year. So basically, it tracks the usage, the raw usage for the router. And you can see how much bandwidth they've consumed on each one of the interfaces. It'll also, for example, monitor the quality. So it'll tell you how many packets have been dropped and what the overall quality is of the connection. And so some very nice logging features. We use this a lot, especially on the VLA installations, to keep track of their usage. There's also a real-time traffic graph, which basically shows you what's happening this very second. So right now on our WAN port, we're consuming 1 kbps. So you can monitor this and see and look for spikes. Make sure that they're getting the total bandwidth that they're expecting, 400 kbps in the case of a fleet broadband. Notice any spikes or any anomalies in the usage of the vessel. There's also another service called Bandwidth D, which I'm not going to go into in much detail, but it allows you to monitor bandwidth by internal IP address and protocol. So you can see how much a user on a computer used for FTP and when, in very detailed. So there's a lot of logging reports and ways to monitor bandwidth utilization on the particular router.
On
Okay.
which step?
Can you go back to bandwidth again?
That's Bandwidth D, yes, it's under services.
Services?
Yep, Bandwidth D. So you have to turn it on. You have to give it the subnet that you want to monitor, and it'll generate some graphs. Let me just show you what that just kind of looks like. If you go to Bandwidth D, I'm just going to go to the Bandwidth D website. This is the project. Basically, it generates graphs that look like this, which tell you, you know, how much traffic a specific IP address on the network used, and generates reports like this. For example, this IP address generated a total of 2 gigas of traffic. Of that, 1.2 was TCP, 130 was UDP, ICMP, HTTP, point-to-point, FTP, and so forth. So it enumerates the protocols and how much bandwidth is used by each IP address on the network. So you know who's doing what, how much they're consuming, and do detailed analysis of the actual data being transferred through that router from your internal local network. It's a very powerful tool in keeping track and generating graphs and diagnostics. For example, this is a graph of the usage on a client at 64.215.40.0, the 0 subnet. And so it specifies basically the traffic mix, when and what was transferred on that particular local area network. So it's an analysis tool that you use to keep track of usage and the kind of usage that's happening on your local network. A very powerful tool. So I'll let you experiment with that. You need to turn it on and then just run it locally in your internal network and then just see what kind of information it provides for you.
Okay.
Wow, I mean, we've been on the phone now for, I don't know, an hour and 45 minutes, and we just talked about the router. We could spend days talking about the router. The router does a lot of stuff, obviously, so it's going to take a little while for you to learn the features. I really suggest that you spend some time with the manual and then just experiment with this. For doing a basic installation on a fleet broadband 200 megabyte plan, it's pretty straightforward. You just plug it in and go create some firewall rules that block traffic, and you should be good. All right?
Okay.
Okay, VoIP. Let's talk about VoIP. So we have a full industrial PBX on this unit. The PBX will run an entire corporation. It's a very, very powerful PBX. The PBX will do anything you could possibly think you would want to do. It is based on a project called FreeSwitch, and I want to point out some resources for you. It is very easy. It's very easy to set up, but if you start customizing and changing basic functionality, in other words, if what you want to do is more complicated than just creating extensions and changing the auto attendant messages, then you probably need some additional resources. And let me just go ahead and point these out to you. FreeSwitch. These are books that you probably will want to buy. This book right here is a book that is called FreeSwitch 1.016. That is basically the documentation for the PBX. We are running FreeSwitch 1.06 on this router.
Okay.
So anything that you can do in that book can be done on the router. You don't need the book if you just want to do some basic configuration like we're going to go over today, and just some basic stuff. If you want to create SIP extensions, create postpaid or prepaid lines, and change the AVR, you don't need this book. But if you want to have calling queues, you want to have just strange whatever, this book basically documents that. So I recommend that you take a look at this book if you're really going to get serious into modifying the functionality of the PBX. But if all you want is just a simple telephone system, then the book is not required. There's also a second book called the FreeSwitch Cookbook. This is basically just examples of configurations for the PBX. If you're interested in that, then you might want to buy that as well. So just some resources for you.
Okay.
The PBX is all GUI based. So we're running a front end to PBX to the FreeSwitch called Fusion PBX. And most of the functionality of the PBX is controlled by the GUI. And so there's not much for you to do. The GUI is pretty easy to use. And I'll go through this. As stated previously, at redportglobal.com, there is a manual VoIP router administration guide, which is 20 or 30 pages long, which will cover everything we're going to talk about today. And that's your primary resource for configuring the VoIP system for the Redport. Okay, so you need to log in. Superadmin is the super administrator username, and the password is wxa513. Again, that's outlined in the Quick Start Guide. So you'll notice the router Quick Start Guide at the Redport Global. If you download and print the Quick Start Guide, it's a one-page guide that basically shows you how to do some basic configuration for the router. It gives you the username and the password. So superadmin is how you log in. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And you get a menu-driven GUI for your PBX. One thing to note is on the 513, basically the PBX is bound to the router, so you log into it by logging into the Redport and then selecting the menu. On the 404, the 404 does not have a router, it's just the PBX tool. So when you plug the 404 into your network, it's configured for DHCP. So it'll just acquire a DHCP address from your server. So you need to go take a look at your router to find out what the IP address is for your 404, because it's not statically assigned, it's a DHCP address. The Ethernet port, there's only one Ethernet port on the 404. It's the one that's next to the serial console. The other two have plugs in them. They don't work, they're not used for anything. So you just plug the 404 into your local LAN on that Ethernet port, turn it on, and then go look at your router at your DHCP listings to find out what the IP address of that router is, and then just log into that IP address.
Okay.
If you're going to be using the 404 as a SIP PBX with SIP extensions, you really need to assign it a static IP address. You would do that at the router. There is no way to assign a static IP address on the 404 itself. You would go to the router and just bind the MAC address for the 404 to an IP address so that you know what the IP address is and it doesn't change on you. Are you going to be using 303s on these vessels, or do they have some other kind of router?
No, present project we are going to use 404.
Okay, and so they have, what's the router on the vessel? Do you know? Is it a Cisco router?
No, it's not a Cisco router.
Okay, it's a router of some sort though.
Normal router.
Yeah,
Normal
that,
router.
yeah, that normal router will have the ability to, it'll have a DHCP server on it,
Yes, yes.
and it will
Yeah.
and it will have the ability to bind a MAC address to a specific IP address.
Yeah.
So you need to do that if you use SIP extensions on the vessel because you don't want your PBX changing its IP address,
Okay.
right? That makes sense? Because
Yeah.
you're going to configure a telephone with the IP address of the PBX, and if the PBX changes the IP address because it reboots and the DHCP server gives it a different IP address, then your phones won't work.
In this router, is there any option from this analog phone we can find out the IP address of the router?
No, there's not. The only way to find out the IP address of the router of this unit is by basically looking at the system router and just dumping the DHCP table and seeing what it is. It will show up. It will show up with a name. So, for example, if I go back to, let's see, I'll go back here. The DHCP leases. Yeah, see, it does have a host name. So right now, so here's the DHCP entry for this router on the 513. You notice that it has a host name of wxa VoIP. And it has a MAC address and an IP address. So basically what you do is you would bind this MAC address to that IP address and you would make it static. On the 513, there's no need to do that because in the 513, it's always going to have 192.168.77.2 as the IP address. But on your 404 installation, you'll have to go to your router, and you'll have to find the equivalent panel, and then you'll have to find it in the DHCP table, and then there's usually a button. In this case, the plus, and you push that button, and it'll automatically from then on just give it that IP address every time the unit boots up. So I would go to, you need to dump the DHCP table and look for host name wxa VoIP, because that's the name that it advertises to the DHCP server when it broadcasts for its IP address. You'll also note that all of our routers start with A098.
Okay.
Actually, 809805, right? So when you dump the DHCP table on your router, you just look for that MAC address and then assign it a static IP address on the router.
Okay.
All right? Every router is going to be different, but there is a function for doing this because every router that I know of has this feature.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, so back to Web Accelerator. Let me go back to my VoIP box. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is you need to activate the unit. So under the System menu, Activation, if the unit hasn't been activated, you're going to get a screen that says Enter Key. I don't know if your unit has been activated or not. Has it been activated?
No,
We don't get anything.
Okay, just give it a minute. So you've clicked on activation, right?
just a minute. It's
Still waiting?
yeah. We got an activation procedure.
So you need
We
a key,
have
you need a key, right? Is it asking you for a key?
Yeah, key.
No, no, no. It's already have the key and there is an option for deactivate. So I think it is already activated.
Okay, it's activated. Wonderful. So you're looking at a screen that looks exactly like mine now, right?
Correct, correct, correct.
Okay, wonderful. Perfect. Okay, so this unit was activated for you before it was shipped. It should work. I mean, you should be able to plug a telephone in there and make a phone call right now. For a unit that comes to you that is inactive, all you're going to see in this screen is this activate, this thing where it says activate, deactivate. It'll just have that with the button that says activate, and that is it. And then you just contact us and you give us the MAC address of the unit, which is on the back of the unit on a little paper label, and then we will send you this key, and you will put the key in there, and then you will activate the unit.
Okay.
So this is now. So this unit has been activated, and let me just go over some of the screen elements that are very important. First of all, this very first line, this decoder status, is very important. What you're looking for is OK. That tells you that the VoIP unit has established communication with the VoIP server and that the unit is able to make phone calls.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, if there's a firewall issue, if there's a networking issue, that might say barred. It might say, you know, there's some kind of status there. If it doesn't say OK, you're not going to be making a phone call. So that's a very important status. This tells the decoder. This is the compression decoder for the VoIP. It tells you that your unit is online and it's ready to make phone calls. The other very important thing to note is this phone number, this number right here, the serial number, 21283. You need to know that number for the vessel. That number is going to be used when allocating prepaid accounts for PIN codes. Yes, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, but just note that that's an important number. So in the status line, there's two things you're looking for. You're looking for this, and you're looking for this.
Okay. I would interrupt.
Yes.
Here I see the delay for you is 39 milliseconds.
Yes.
For me it is 229 milliseconds.
Yes, and when you're on, yes, this is the delay between your unit and the router, and I'm sorry, and the provider.
On connection.
On Fleet Broadband, that's going to be about 800 milliseconds.
Okay.
And or longer.
Any VSAT?
Pardon me?
Any VSAT?
For VSAT, for VSAT, it's going to be 900 milliseconds.
900. Okay.
Okay, and for Fleet Broadband, it's probably going to be a little longer. I can't remember exactly, but it's going to be longer. So this is just basically how long it takes data to be transmitted over the link to the VoIP server. So 39 milliseconds is nothing for me because I'm on a high-speed internet connection, and hey, the server is not very far from here. For you, you're on a slower internet connection, a lot further away, but still 200 milliseconds is a lot faster than a satellite link. Okay, so we can pretty much tell what kind of satellite link you're using by just looking at the delay. All right, so scrolling down, this is the important section. This is the configuration for the analog lines. First of all, this is your telephone number right here. All right.
Yeah.
So you'll notice it's a U.S. phone number.
Yes.
So we can allocate numbers in different countries. By default, we'll just allocate you U.S. phone numbers. If you dial that number, you will dial this unit, your unit. In my case, it's this. If I dial this phone number, if I pick up my phone and I dial this number, it'll ring this PBX. So the line, if you look at the router, on the front of the router, you'll see designators for each one of those analog ports, A1, A2, A3, A4. This is the setting for each one of those ports, okay? Now, this is the caller ID for that line, and there's a pull down that enables crew line access or postpaid access. Right now, all 4 lines are postpaid. If you change that to true, then that will become a crew line, which means that a PIN code will be required in order to make a phone call through that line.
Okay.
Once you make the changes, you need to come down here and you hit save. The very first time you activate one of these units, as described in the manual, you have to enter the key and activate the unit. And then, after the unit is activated, you must come down here and hit the save. And if you don't do that, the unit will not become active. And that's outlined in the quick start guide for the VoIP. So to activate a brand new unit that we ship you, you send us a serial number. We'll send you back your decoder serial number, a key, and your DID. You will enter the key into this form, hit activate, and then you'll come down here and you'll hit save after you determine which lines are going to be crew and which lines are going to be postpaid. And at that point, you are done. The unit is ready to be used. That's all that's been done to your unit. So the key was entered and the save button was hit, and that was it. So for a simple installation that just uses analog lines for outbound with prepaid and postpaid and allows inbound calls through a simple IVR, all that is required is to do this, and you're ready to rock. So you could take this unit right now, ship it to India, put it on your vessel, and you're ready to go. Okay?
And like calling between the phones, these 4 analog phones we can call in between them.
Yeah, so the extensions, and this is described in the manual, the analog phone extensions are 1011 for A1. We should really put that in the GUI here. It's 1011, 1012 for A2, 1013 for A3, and 1014 for A4.
Okay. Say for example, I activated A1 and A2 as false, that is postpaid.
Yes.
A3 and A4 as true, that is prepaid.
That is correct.
Still I can call in between.
You can call in between, that is correct.
Okay.
Now, yeah, the PIN codes are only when you're making outbound calls. If you were to dial this phone number right now, if you were to pick up your phone and dial country code 1-832-730-4720, what you would hear is you would hear an IVR, you would hear a message, right?
Okay.
The message that is on the system is very simple. It says, please enter the extension, followed by #. That's all it says. So if you want to dial extension A1, at that prompt you enter 1011 and A1 will ring and you pick it up and you can have a telephone conversation.
Say from anywhere outside call, we need to enter that as well. 1011.
1011 is the extension for A1. So right now when you dial 1-832-730-4270, the PBX will answer the phone and it'll say, please enter the extension number you desire, followed by #. If you enter nothing, it'll repeat the message 3 times and then it'll hang up. If you enter 1011 #, it will bridge the call to line A1 and the phone on line A1 will ring
Directly.
Okay, so you have one DID, but you can have 200 or more extensions, right?
Just a minute. If there is any option to disable it, PBX?
Yes. It's a PBX and it's totally programmable. You can do whatever you want to. You can change the message. You can bar all inbound calls. You can allow inbound calls to a specific DID, and I'll show you how to do that. So for example, say for example A1 is the captain, and you want inbound calls only to go to A1. You can program this PBX so that only calls to A1, only calls to that phone number go to A1, and that's it. No message, nothing. The phone rings, the captain picks up the line. The captain's not there, it goes to voicemail.
Not there, goes to voicemail. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll show you how to do that. That's all very simple to do. So you've got some. You can. So you. That's called creating your dialing rules. You have ways of routing inbound calls, and every vessel is going to be different. And so this is where you have to kind of like know what they want to do. By default, the router comes with the IVR, which just announces the extension, allowing a user to enter extension to call any extension. However, in your particular instance, that's not what you want, and therefore you have to change the default configuration, and I'll show you how to do that in a second.
Okay.
All right? Now, the other thing to note is that you have a phone number. You can have multiple phone numbers if you want. So say, for example, you wanted 2 phone numbers, one that dials A1 and one that dials A2. Well, you can do that. We can assign multiple DIDs to the vessel, although really only one is usually required because you've got a PBX which has a message, and you can have an auto attendant give you the message, and then the message can instruct the user how the call gets routed. So so far, is that so clear so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about SIP extensions, because I'm going to encourage you to use SIP phones.
Mm-hmm.
When you create a SIP extension, the SIP extension is going to have an extension number.
Okay.
It's going to have a caller ID. It's going to have a password. Right, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But before I get there, I'm still on this page, and the reason I focus that, it has an extension number 201, for example, or 1001. It has a password. It has a caller ID. The caller ID can be either 21283 in my case, or in your case it's going to be 2129 something. Or it can be the DID that was assigned to the unit. So here's the important part now. If the caller ID is the serial number, is the decoder serial number, that SIP extension is a prepaid extension, and a PIN code is required to make outbound calls from that SIP extension. If, however, the caller ID for that SIP extension is the DID for the unit, then that SIP extension is a postpaid extension.
Okay.
That's how you activate or deactivate. That's how you enable crew accounts for users. This crew line down here, this pull down that says true or false, all that's doing for you is it's changing the caller ID. And for those where you set to crew line A3 and A4 and hit save, you'll notice that the caller ID has been changed to the serial number for your unit. Okay? So that's very, very important. You need to keep that in mind. That's how you distinguish between the two kinds of lines. Now, say for example that you're going to create 200 SIP extensions, and you want those 200 SIP extensions to all be prepaid.
Okay.
Rather than go through and assign the serial number to each individual thing, you can set a global variable which will set the default caller ID for those units, so that when you create the extension, it will automatically be prepaid, and you don't have to actually go in there and tell it that it's a prepaid extension. And I want to show you how to do that. If under System Variables, you will see two variables right here under Defaults: caller ID, outbound caller name. You want to edit these and put in either the serial number or the DID for the unit, so that you don't have to enter them every time you create an extension. If you enter the serial number it's going to be a prepaid. If it's enter the DID, it's going to be postpaid. Okay? And to do this, it's very simple. You just click on the E. You just change the value to 21283, hit save, and that's it. From now on, any SIP extension that you create will by default have that value for the caller ID, and of course you can change it so that 200 extensions are prepaid, but when you create the 201st one, you can make it a postpaid by overriding this value in the extension itself. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out because you probably want to do that now because it probably hasn't been done. Just go ahead and edit that and just make it the serial number for the unit. All right, next I want to talk about creating extensions.
Okay.
All right. Before I talk about creating an extension, I want to talk about users. One of the really nice things about the PBX is that you can create individual users, and that user can be assigned to an extension. The user will have a username and a password, and he can come to this PBX, log in with his username and his password, and he can get his voicemail, and he can get the CDRs for any call that has been made from his extension. That's really nice because you might have a user with an Android. You might have a crew member with an Android phone,
Okay.
right? And you can create. Pardon me?
This page.
Is under accounts. Click on the word accounts on the toolbar, and you'll see it under user manager.
Okay.
And if you click on user manager, you will see a user that I've already created, El Soltero. And if you click on the little E next to El Soltero, you will see that this is a username, it has a password, and some additional information about that particular user. That means that I can log in to this PBX with the username El Soltero, and I can look at my CDRs and I can get my voicemail. So if I buy PIN codes and make prepaid calls, I can go and I say, oh my God, that went too fast. I didn't get my 60 minutes. I can log in and look at all my calls and go, oh yeah, there was a call to my mother for 30 minutes.
Okay.
All right. So it's not necessary to create accounts for the users. It's just nice that if you do, then you can bind these accounts to specific extensions. When you create extensions, you can say this extension belongs to El Soltero, and when you do that, when El Soltero logs in, he can look at all the CDRs and get the voicemail for that particular extension.
Okay.
Okay? All right, let's go create a SIP extension. You will notice that the system comes with 5 extensions. Well, we already know what 1011, 1012, 1013, and 1014 are, right? Those are your analog ports.
Correct.
Now, you can create extensions for any, you can name the extensions any way you want to. I suggest that you start with 1001 for your SIP extensions. Or
And
200 or 2001, it doesn't matter.
Is it required to have 4 digits or can be increased?
It can be 3 digits.
Okay.
You can make them whatever you want to. You might even be able to make them 2 digits. I've never tried 2 digits. Typically, it's either 3 digits or 4 digits or 5 digits. You could experiment with that. So to create an extension, you just click on the little plus sign. I'm just going to edit this extension because I've got a sample SIP extension in there. You give it the extension number. You give it the SIP password. Any users that you've created are going to show up in this list, under user list, and so you can select that and you can assign a user to this extension. So extension 1001 is El Soltero. That means that any phone call that is made on or received on 1001 will show up in the CDRs for El Soltero when El Soltero logs into the system. Or you can just leave it blank, in which case then only the system administrator will be able to look at the CDRs. So you give them a password. You can give them a voicemail password so that they can check the voicemail directly from their handsets.
E.
Plus.
Not plus, is E.
Yeah, are you back in? Are you over here? So you would just click on the little plus. I just did it. I just clicked on the E next to El Soltero so that I'm editing the one for El Soltero that's on your system, which by the way is me. So this is just a sample that works. By the way, you can use a SIP phone that that has extension 1001 with password 1001, and you can actually make a SIP phone call without having to create an extension. This extension is a perfectly functioning extension. So you enter the username, your password, you assign it a user if you want to. You give it a voicemail password so that they can check their voicemail from their handset. Once again, you enter the extension number here. This is the actual code that is used to authenticate the SIP phone. Normally, you would use the same account code as you would extension number. That just makes things a little simpler. You give them a caller ID name. You give them a caller ID number. Okay? Now, outbound caller ID, outbound caller number. This is how you determine whether this is a prepaid or a postpaid. Remember about that variable that we just set? The global variable basically is what's in here. So it's going to be whatever you set in the global variable. However, you can come in here and you can delete this and put in the decoder serial number or the DID and make this a prepaid or a postpaid. So if you've made the global variable prepaid and this is a postpaid account, you would just delete this and just put in the DID for the unit in here, and then this would be a postpaid account. Does that make sense? Okay, remember I told you that back over here under system variables,
Okay.
outbound caller ID, we could set a global variable that applies to all extensions.
Yeah.
That's what, going back to accounts, you notice it says outbound caller ID, outbound caller name, right?
Correct.
I can go back here to accounts, edit, and you'll notice that right here, see the variable names? There they are, right there. So this extension will use whatever you set in those variables. So if you set those variables to be the serial number for the decoder, then it'll be a prepaid. If you set it to be the DID, then it'll be postpaid. However, if you want to make it different, then you can just delete this and just put in either the serial number or the DID. If you put in the serial number, it'll be prepaid. If you put in the DID, it'll be postpaid.
What is it?
The DID is the phone number. Stands for direct inward dialing. The DID is the phone number. So if I go back to system activation, which takes it a minute, okay, and I scroll down here, this is my DID. So that's just jargon for the phone number. In Marsata, it would be the ISDN number. Same thing. Okay. So we're back to extensions. Okay, we're sitting here, we're editing, and then you just hit save. You just hit save, and you just created a SIP extension, and that's it. And so you just go ahead and create 200 extensions. They all have an extension number, a password, and then a caller ID, which indicates whether they're a prepaid or postpaid account. To configure your SIP phone, you would just basically give the SIP phone the IP address of the PBX. You would give it the extension number. You would give it the password, and that's all you have to do. And now your phone should be able to work. If you look at the manual, there's an example of setting up several different kinds of phones for using the PBX. For example, here is X-Lite. X-Lite is a soft phone, which is free, which runs on PCs and Macintoshes.
Okay.
As soon as I get it up here, hello, come on. There's something, I just upgraded my Mac. And Xlite is not working on this. Oh no, here it is. Okay, just being slow. So here's Xlite, all right?
Powered by soft.
So here's Xlite. Xlite is a soft phone, right? It allows me to use my Macintosh to make phone calls.
Okay.
Just like if it were a regular telephone. I can have this running on my iPad. I can have it running on my Android phone. I can have it running on my Mac. I can have it running on my PC. It's just a telephone that is a SIP phone.
Okay.
If I go to Preferences and I go to Accounts, here I would enter 1001. I would enter the password 1001. I would enter the authentication code 1001. And I would enter the IP address of the router 192.168.0.7 in my case. And at that point, this should register, and there it is. It's green. I'm registered. I can now make a phone call from my Macintosh through the PBX. Right? So if I do this, and I call, I will be able to make a phone call. Okay? But I'm not going to do that because I'm using
Please enter your complete number.
So it's asking me for a PIN code. So that's pretty much it. That's how to set up an extension. Pretty simple to do. Okay, again, that's all discussed in the manual. Let's talk about any questions on extensions.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we need to try once. So
You need to try one. What I suggest you do is, you can do this very easily by, again, just downloading Xlite and just configuring it on your PC. If you just go to Xlite, again, this is in the manual, Counterpath Corporation. This example with that same client is in the manual. You can download Xlite from counterpath.com. It's called Xlite. Here it is. Here's the download button. You can install it on your PC, and you can configure it, and you can make phone calls and receive phone calls on your PC through that extension number. And then again, the manual.
For Windows.
It works for Windows, yes. It works for Windows. It's free for Windows and for Macintoshes, and this one is for pay for iPhone and for Android, but there are free ones for Android and iPhone as well, including one that is done by us. For example, we just released this. Go to you guys use Android there?
iPhones mostly.
Okay, well, we have an iPhone version coming out that'll be free, but it's not quite ready. But we do have one for Android, and so for example, we have something called Xgate Satellite Voice. You can download this; it's free, and put it on your Android phone and use this to make phone calls through the PBX using this application. And this one is ours. We make this one, and we'll be making one. And we have one for the iPhone as well. It just hasn't been released, and these are free. So you don't have to pay for them.
Okay. So my question is like from the office, say these VoIP phones we are going to place in the ship.
That is correct.
Okay. The office is going to be in India, that is in land.
Yes.
So from the office they need to call the ship. That
Yeah,
is
so
the internal calling.
Yeah, they'll just use the phone number. They'll just use the DID. They'll just dial. They'll make a U.S. phone number, a U.S. call to the U.S. and they'll just enter country code 1-832 and the rest of the phone number, and the ship will ring, and then it'll go to the captain, or it'll go to the PBX, it'll go to the auto attendant, it'll go wherever you program that call to go.
Okay. It will not be free, right?
It will not be free. No, your cost is a postpaid call, and your cost is 12.5 cents for that call.
2.5 cents. Okay.
12.5 cents.
Now, like this soft phones, if they are using in
Yes.
their office, the soft phone function, then is it possible to call?
Well, they can use a soft phone, but they need a VoIP provider. they will not be connecting to the PBX on the ship, and the reason for that is because you don't want that VoIP traffic going directly to the PBX over your fleet broadband, because that'll be very expensive, because those VoIP phones use a lot of bandwidth.
Okay.
So they will just use a regular telephone, or they can use a VoIP phone, but they will be using a VoIP provider on land to make the call for them.
On land to call.
So they'll just use the regular telephones to make the call.
Okay.
All right?
All right. So like if one of the offices here, they already have a Cisco PBX system running in their office.
Yes.
Either Cisco based or Panasonic PBX.
Yep.
Since that is already programmed, can this be included to that?
Okay, so we do have something called so we have an intra phone system where you can make phone calls without having to pay for the termination fees.
Okay.
But for them to do that, they have to buy a 404 or 400 and put it in their office.
Okay.
And then once they do that, they can actually call through that unit to the vessel. And that phone call is free, but there is a monthly charge. So they have to buy a 400 or 404 or 408 for the office.
Okay.
And they have to pay $50 a month additional at the office and at the vessel. So that's $100 a month. And once they do that...
Vessel is anyhow paying a DID. Correct?
Pardon me?
Vessel, $50 is for the DID.
Well, the vessel is paying $30. You're paying $30 for the DID. They need to pay
Yeah.
an additional $50.
Okay.
So that's $80 total. That's your cost, by the way. $80 total. The office needs to pay $80. $30 for the DID and $50 for the service. And now they can call each other without incurring any additional fees.
Okay. So that is like $80 they are paying and they are free for.
They can make as many calls as they want. They will not be charged anything else for it. So if they're making more than, say, 800 minutes a month in calls to and from the office,
Okay.
then it's probably well. Actually, you can do the computation. You're paying 12.5 cents per minute, right?
Yeah.
So they have to pay 100. They have to pay in addition. Okay, so they 12.5 cents a minute plus $30 a month. That's what it costs now. If they want the free calling, they have to buy another PBX. They have to pay another $30, and then they have to pay $100, $50 for each unit. So that's an additional of $130 per month to make calls.
Totally.
Well, to make free calls. So is it cheaper to use calls at 12.5 cents per minute, or is it cheaper to pay $130 a month to make unlimited calls? So you need to do the cost analysis.
Okay.
So if 120. So if I take $130, say 130, and I divide it by 0.125, that's 1,040 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So if they make more than 1,040 minutes of voice calls to the ship a month, it's cheaper to do the in-network calling. If, however, they do less than 1,000 minutes per month, then it's cheaper to just pay the 12.5 cents. All right. So they need to decide what's best for them.
Okay. That's clear.
All right. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about. Okay. So routing. So the last topic I want to talk about is inbound routing. Right now, I've told you that when you call the phone, the PBX, it just comes up and it says, please enter the extension. And if you enter 1001, my SIP phone rings. You want to change that behavior. The rules for what happens when a phone call is made is called a dial plan.
Okay.
And this is an inbound rule that you want to change. So right now, we have an inbound rule. We have several rules listed here, but we only have one rule that is enabled. And that rule is to go to the IVR, to the auto attendant, which is the message that I just told you about. Well, what are other things that you might want to do easily? Well, you might want to have all the phones ring. Well, if you disable the first rule and enable the second rule, then all the phones will ring. If, however, you only want the captain line to ring, then you might disable all of them and enable this one, right?
Yeah.
And then when an inbound rule comes, it'll route it to the captain line. So you have the ability to program rules to tell the system what to do when an inbound call comes. So right now, a simple thing that you might want to do is just have one postpaid line, which is the captain line, assign it to A1. All you got to do is disable the IVR, enable this one, and you've accomplished what you wanted to do. Let's just take a look at this real quickly here. This is where it starts to get a little bit complicated because you have basically some programming that needs to be done, and this is where that book comes in that I was telling you about at Amazon. This guy right here.
Yep.
Because this is where you're now telling the PBX or telling FreeSwitch what you want to do. So this is some of the example of the programming. If you take a look at this rule, so what we're looking at right now is we're looking at this guy right here, this very simple one right here. This is the one that says, hey, when an inbound call comes in, just route it to line 1. If you look at that down here, there's some conditions and some tags which specify how to program that. The first line says that this is an inbound call. The second line basically is a funky, weird thing here that says, wow, what is it that we're trying to match? Well, this is the phone number that you dialed, that was dialed by the user. And this squiggly little stuff here is called a regular expression. And this really says any phone number. This little squiggly just really means any phone number. It means that if anybody uses any phone number to dial this PBX, then this rule will match. And what we want to do is we want to transfer the call to extension 1011. So this is a pretty simple rule set that basically says, hey, if anybody calls the PBX, just transfer them to extension 1011, which is extension A1. So the syntax of these rules and what all this means is defined in the book. So if you want to do something other than what I just described here, you need to read the book. Let's just take one that's a little more complicated. Here is the one that makes all the phones ring, right?
Yeah.
Well, this one is transferring to extension 7002. Wow, well, what is extension 7002? Extension 002 is something called a hunt group. Again, defined in the book. And if I go to apps, I see something called hunt groups. There is my hunt group, my extension 7002. And here is how I program my hunt group and all the rules that say what lines are in the hunt group. So now we're starting to get more complicated. So if you want to do stuff that is more than just call an IVR, transfer to one extension, or make all extensions ring, you're going to have to do some reading and some research and some education on your part to learn how to configure the PBX to do these more complex things. We can help you if you like, but just know that really that's more than most people want to do. Most people just want to have one phone ring, all phone rings, or go to the IVR. So I'm going to just focus on the IVR. Right now we have the messages coming into the IVR. One of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to just change the message other than just dial the extension. So I'll let you play with that. If you look at the rules, basically what we're doing is we're calling an IVR. And so there's nothing for you to change here in the dial plan if all you want to do is change the message of the IVR. So this is in the manual, but what I'm going to do is quickly go through how you record a new message and how you change the message for the PBX. You go to Applications, you will see a section here called Recording. We have no recordings, but you can upload a recording that you've recorded. So you pull up your PC, you bring up your favorite program to record a message, you record a WAV file.
Okay.
And you upload it. That's one way to record a message and add a message to the system. Another way to add a message to the system is to use a telephone and dial extension 900. I'm sorry, dial extension star, this is the extension number right here, star 732673 off of a regular telephone. When you do that, you'll get a little menu that says, please record your message. You record your message, and once you do that, that message will appear under recordings. Once it appears there, you can rename it and change its name. So you have to get the recording onto the system, and you can do that either by uploading a file or by recording it from a telephone extension. Again, this is all in the manual. Once you've uploaded it, you can then tell the IVR to use that recording. You would go to the apps, you would go to IVR menu. Here is my IVR message. I edit it, and here is my greeting right there. See where it says greeting long? After you've recorded the message and you do a pull down, you will see your greeting show up under recordings, and you can just select it. And then you hit save, and voila, you've got a new message. Okay? So fairly complex, but I will allow you to read the manual and play with that. It's not that difficult to do. You upload a recording, you then go to IVR menu, you then edit the IVR menu, and then you just change the greeting to the message that you just uploaded to the server. And if you want to know more about IVRs, you can read about them in the book. You can do cascading IVRs. You can do IVRs that change by time of day. You can do anything. So, you know, you hear these fancy companies where you call and all these menus and all, you can do all of that here as well. Typically on a vessel, all they want to do is say, welcome to Crystal Silver Seas. Please enter 1 for the captain, enter 2 for the engine room, enter 3 for the purser, or enter the extension for the phone you desire to call. Thank you very much. So there's a simple change the message, and then you're done. Okay, we covered a lot of material. We've been on the phone for almost 3 hours.
Yeah.
I am sure you're feeling overwhelmed. My message to you is that it's really not that difficult to do. It's all GUI based. It's all described very well in the manuals. The simple operations are very simple to do, but you can get as complicated as you like to meet your specific requirements. You're going to have to spend a few days playing with the equipment. I'm sure you'll have more questions. Just go ahead and send them in, and we'll answer them as best we can.
I think this is like a complete book. It has everything.
There's more than a complete book. I mean, there's actually 3 published books that are at Amazon.com that you can buy that describe the functionality of this router. And so, you know, like I say, I mean, it can be as complicated as you want it to be, but really what you'll find is that it's not that difficult to do because the presets are there, and once you learn how to use a router, it's all GUI based and it's pretty straightforward and simple. For your first installations, we can provide you help. And like I say, your VoIP system works. You can just put a phone in there and start using it right now without making any changes or modifications to it.
Okay. Already out of school for a long time, and now we are not used to read books.
Yeah, that's fine. Now, I've recorded this entire session.
Okay.
So I will later on today upload that to our web server, and you'll be able to download it and you'll be able to review it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So between this recording and the manuals that are on the Redport website, I think that you'll be fine. And and then for your first installation, you know, if you're feeling overwhelmed or whatever, just let us know. We have consultants that can log into the vessel for you and review the stuff and set it all up and get you going. So I mean, there'll be some investment in your time in learning how to use this technology, but once you do that, you'll be able to replicate it across all your vessels very easily.
Okay. One question.
Yes.
For 404, can you log in remotely?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so what'll happen is the 404 is just an appliance on the internal network, right?
Oh.
So you have to have a router that allows you to VPN into your network so that you can access the 404 remotely.
TeamViewer?
You can use TeamViewer. Yeah, sure. TeamViewer will work just fine. I mean, all you need to be able to do is access this web page internally. So if somebody runs TeamViewer on the vessel, you can use TeamViewer to connect to their PC and then run the web browser on their PC to connect to the PBX to change the PBX.
That's it. And one question is that, Luis, is there any reset option for these routers?
Yeah, there are. So, for example, if you go back to, and again, this is described in the manual. If you go back here to this router, you can go to factory defaults. There's a nice little button there that will set it to the defaults.
Okay. Any in the menu web, that is okay. But any hardware reset, if suppose miss out the IPs and not able to log in.
So if you lock yourself out, which by the way is very difficult to do on this router because under advanced there is this thing called GUI. It's web anti-lockout rule. Let me just find that for you. Anti-lockout. Okay, anti-lockout. Okay. I'm going to mention this to you because this is going to get you. See this anti-lockout rule? That anti-lockout rule creates a firewall rule that takes precedence over any rule that you create. That means that if that anti-lockout rule is enabled, there is not a firewall rule that you can create on the LAN that will disable you from being able to get access to the GUI. Now, in a lot of systems, that is bad, because you don't want the users to be able to log into the router remotely directly, and so you will disable it for those installations. However, just know that as long as you're running the default configuration, you can create any firewall rule you want and you can't lock yourself out. Now, if however you lock yourself out, then what you need to do is you need to hook up to the serial console on the unit. There's a serial cable that's included with the device. There's a serial port on the front of the unit, and so you would connect that to a PC and run PuTTY on the PC or HyperTerminal or something to access the console, and then from the console you can do a full reset. So the answer is yes, you can recover from a disaster, but it's going to require you to connect to the console to do the full reset. There is in the manual there's a section that discusses the console, and it'll show you how to do that. Now I can show you what the console looks like. I don't have a serial connection to the console right now, but I can SSH to it. Okay. So you can do this with PuTTY. Just run PuTTY and you can SSH to the console, and there is a description in the manual that says how to do that. But when you hook up a serial connection to the console, you're going to get a menu that looks exactly like this. Okay, so let me just see if I can make that bigger for you. All right, so that's what the serial console is going to look like. You'll notice there's a couple menus in here, and reset to factory defaults is number 4. So if you hook up a serial cable to the console and you run hyperterminal or PuTTY or something to connect to that console, then you can go ahead and execute function number 4, which will do a factory default on that console.
Okay, you are using it through hyperterminal?
Right now, I'm on a Mac.
Okay,
So,
right.
yeah, but if you're on a PC, you would use hyperterminal, or you would use PuTTY.
Okay.
And if you look at the manual, it'll show you how to use PuTTY to get connected to the console.
Okay.
And you might want to try that, because you may lock yourself out in your experimentation, and then you may want to reset factory defaults from the console. But if you have access to the GUI, then you can always do it from here.
Yes, right. Okay, in case suppose we miss out the IP address of the unit, and
Then you can just
we're
use
not
the
able to access the web.
Then you can just use the console.
Yeah.
The console will allow you. The console will show you what the IP addresses are, and if you do a factory default, it'll set the WAN port to DHCP, and it'll set the IP address of the LAN port to 192.168.10.1. So by setting the factory defaults, you're back to what you've got right now, and then you can go ahead and reconfigure it from there. The other thing to note also is that when you're playing around, eventually you're going to get a configuration that you like, that you want to replicate. So you'll go to the backup restore, and you'll download the configuration. Then you can upload that configuration to a different router and not have to do the work of setting it up all over again.
Yes, yes, right. So the configuration file save and upload option is there.
That is correct.
Okay. Perfect.
All right, so we covered a lot of ground here. You really need to spend some time with the router and read the manuals and the quick start guides and just start experimenting.
Yeah.
But for your 200 megabyte for this ship in India, it's going to be easy. You've got a 404. There is no firewall. There's no router. You just activate the unit and through the PBX, and then create SIP extensions, and you're finished. Maybe change the message for the IVR. Or if you're only going to use analog lines, then you really don't need to do anything. Just put it in there and just hook up the analog lines, and you're done.
Right.
For the ships, 200 megabyte ships, you're going to want to go to the firewall and create firewall rules that block access to the internet on the LAN port. And then you're done. There's not much more to do there, because you're not using the proxy filtering, you're not using the reporting, you're not using the pin codes.
Right. In case, okay. In 404,
Yes.
is there any option to use SIP phones over there instead of analog phones?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. You can. So the wxa513 is SIP only. The WX404 is SIP and analog with 4 analog ports, just like the 513.
Okay, but in this router there is only WAN port. There is no LAN port. So how can you?
On the 404, you put the 404 on the LAN for the vessel.
Okay.
You just hook it up to the switch. There is no route. There's no routing capability. You just take the 404. It's an appliance. It's like a PC on the local network.
Okay, right. Okay.
You just hook it up to the switch, That's all you have to do. And then it'll have an IP address, and it'll be an IP address in the subnet for the internal network for the vessel.
We'll check that.
Okay, but okay. Actually, I'm not exactly clear of this theoretically, so
We'll check it. We'll check it.
try out and check.
Yeah, so you got to remember that the 513 is a router
Yeah.
and a 404. In the case of your vessel where you already have a router, it has a Cisco router or some D-Link router or something. It doesn't have a WXA router. It has some other router. The 404 is just an appliance on that network. So you're going to have your satellite link. You're going to have a Cisco router or whatever. You're going to have a switch, and then you're going to have all your PCs, and your 404 is going to be one of those items plugged into the switch.
Okay.
It will have an IP address. The IP address will be 192.168.10.1.15. something. It'll be, or 10.69.30.15. It'll be something. You just need to know what it is, because those SIP phones are going to be on the same network, on the same subnet, and we'll be able to access the PBX directly by just using the IP address of that 404.
Okay, right. And I want to know that whether this 404 is already activated.
It might. I think it is. I think we activated them before we send them. If not, you'll just go to System,
Yeah.
Activation, and just send us the serial number that's on the back and the little sticker, and then I'll send you back the code so that you can go ahead and activate it.
Okay, right.
The interface for the 404 for the PBX is identical to the interface on the 513. It's the same. It's the same unit. It's just that we have a 404 integrated with a router. But so if you take the top off of a 513, you'll notice that it has two boards. One of them is a router, one of them is the PBX. If you take the top off of a 404, you'll notice that one of the boards is missing. It's the router that's missing, but they're 100% identical. Same hardware, same memory, same everything.
Okay.
Your 513 is your latest, right?
That
Or
is
you have
513. Yeah, 513 is the top of the line latest unit. Yeah, that's correct. It replaces the 503, which has been discontinued.
disconnected. Okay.
So you have a 500, which is the same as the 513, except it has no analog ports. So it has a PBX, but the PBX is SIP only.
Okay.
Then you have the 513, which is the PBX with 4 analog ports and the router.
Right.
And then you have the 400, which is PBX only for SIP, no analog ports. You have the 404, which is SIP, PBX, and 4 analog ports. And you have the 408, which is SIP, PBX, and 8 analog ports.
Okay.
So 8 analog ports we can connect.
If you need more than 8 analog ports, then you just have to buy 2.
Yeah.
But what I suggest you do is if you need more analog ports, you just use the Cisco PAP-Ts and just to configure them that way.
Right. Right.
It's less expensive, and it gives you more flexibility because you're using the LAN to put the phones around instead of having to lay copper wire.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, Luis. So I think we covered a lot today. We'll wind up and we'll go through all these sessions once again.
Yes.
Tomorrow it's an off day actually, but we'll be sitting on this 2 equipments.
Yep.
We'll study all the in and out stuffs. We'll be doing a brainstorming session within us to present what to the client and what not to the client.
Yes.
And next week, like Sunday and Monday, we are taking these equipments to a few of the clients to show the demo.
Okay.
So in this now, I will be connecting 404 and 513 in their offices.
Okay.
Can I call in between these numbers? It's
Yes.
possible, right?
Yes, it's possible. That is correct.
That is possible. Okay. So that will be also done shortly, and I'll update you the feedback as well.
Okay.
And this first project is going live. So Mr. Ranjan will be flying to India on 24th,
Okay.
and he'll be completing the installation and commissioning.
Okay, great. Well, if he's only doing the 404 there, right? He's not doing the.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
compression, it is the first look and I wanted it because we were hearing about compression. We are talking a lot in papers,
Right.
but we never had a feel and look of that.
So let me just give you an example. I have a cruise ship that has 2 Fleet Broadband 500s
Okay.
running with unlimited VLA, right? ACE, whatever it's called, the latest unlimited plan. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It has 120 passengers and it has 40 crew. It has a 513. It's running at 800 kbps, right? Two Fleet Broadband 500s running in load balancing mode.
Okay.
That entire ship, all of the voice, all of the internet browsing for the passengers, all of the email, everything for that entire ship is 20 gigabytes per month.
20 gigabytes
Per month.
This is purely because of the compression.
That is because of the compression and all of the firewall routing, the VoIP, everything. So we're running that entire ship with 20 gigabytes. I have another ship which is 80 passengers with 20 crew, running one VLA, 400 kbps, and that vessel uses 7 gigabytes.
Oh.
Yes, and that's because of all the compression and everything else. You got to remember that the compression is going to give you 3 to 5x. So that's really not 10 gigabytes, that's 30 gigabytes or 50 gigabytes of web bandwidth. Okay. And the VoIP is 20 minutes of talk time per megabyte. So the VoIP uses nothing. So they're selling PIN codes to the passengers. They sell PIN codes to the passengers for $1 a megabyte. And the passengers go online and do their Hotmail and their Gmail and their Facebook and all that stuff on these vessels. And they're consuming 20 gigabytes for an entire vessel with 160 people using the internet.
That is 1 megabyte is $1.
That's what they charge. That's what they charge the passengers. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. For me, what will be the cards? Like, if I am ordering a 50 MB card.
Okay, so a 50. So if you're just buying one card, your cost is I think it's on the price sheet, but I believe it's like 20 or 30 cents per megabyte. So that would be $10 for that card, and the maximum cost is $10. So if you buy a 100 megabyte card, it's $10. If you buy a 50 megabyte card, it's $10. If you buy a 5 megabyte card, then it's $1.50.
So it's in that ND and the price list. Correct?
It's in the price list, yeah. Now, if you buy a PIN code server, which I think is $2,000, then you can generate unlimited PIN codes for all your vessels. So. And the other option is for $300 a month, you can generate all the PIN codes for a specific vessel. So if you've got a vessel like a cruise ship, or maybe this platform in India with 300 users or whatever, they're browsing the internet, you can sell them unlimited number of PIN codes for your cost of $300 a month. So you've got several different choices there. You can buy them one at a time. You can buy them in unlimited blocks per vessel, or you can buy a server that basically is unlimited for everything you've got.
Okay, because we would like to go for the server system, but we are early in that.
That is correct. Yeah, so you would just go with either the per pin code basis or the fixed costly fee per vessel. So like our cruise ships, on all of our cruise ships, we charge them $400 a month for as many pin codes as they want, and then they sell those to the passengers at $1 per megabyte.
At $1 per megabyte.
That's what so this is a cruise ship in Antarctica. I mean, the passengers are paying $1,000 a day to be on the cruise ship. So they charge the passengers $1 a megabyte. And the passengers with the VoIP and the PIN codes, the passengers pay for the VLA.
Okay.
Because they make so much money from the PIN codes and the voice calls that pays for all of their airtime for the entire ship. So the ship itself has free satellite service.
Okay. That's good.
Okay.
I think we covered a lot today, and we'll give you a feedback of what exactly we have learned today.
Okay.
We'll come back to you shortly with our detailed reports.
Great. Well, enjoy talking to you. I'm sure you'll have more questions. Just shoot us an email, and I'm sure we'll be able to answer the questions and help you move forward.
Sure. Okay, then. Have a nice day. Weekend's around the corner. So
okay.
you enjoy the weekend too.
Okay, Luis.